Not welcome at the shower, Mom. We wanted to be intimate. That's what my daughter said. Not with cruelty exactly. More with that careful politeness she'd learned somewhere between marrying into money and deciding I no longer fit the picture she was building of her life. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like staying home would be easier for me, like she knew what I needed better than I did. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear for a long moment after she hung up. The kitchen was the same as it's always been. The old Formica counter with the chip near the edge where my husband dropped a cast iron pan the winter before he passed. The window above the sink that looks out onto the backyard, still full of the rose bushes I planted the year my daughter was born. 34 years ago, I had put those in the ground with bare hands in October cold because I wanted something alive to mark the occasion. I was still holding the phone when the kettle began to whistle. I set it down, made tea, stood at the window and watched the yard in the late afternoon light. The roses had gone to hips by then, fat and red. Nothing to look at really, just proof that something was still standing after a long season. I bought a gift. 2 weeks earlier, a quilt I'd spent 3 Saturdays piecing together. Soft yellows and pale greens, the colors she'd told me she wanted for the nursery. I'd been to the fabric store twice. I'd ripped out 2 seams that weren't quite right. My fingers had ached from the work, but I hadn't minded. It was the first grandchild. I thought that meant something. It still does. That's the part that never changes, no matter what your children do. My name is Elspeth. I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house in Guelph, Ontario, where I raised my daughter mostly by myself after her father got sick and then got worse, and then didn't come home from the hospital in February of 2009. I worked as a medical transcriptionist for 22 years. I know what it is to sit quietly in the background of other people's most important moments, to record without being noticed. I thought I'd left that feeling at the office when I retired. Turns out some feelings follow you home. My daughter's name is Meredith. She's 31 now. She used to be a different kind of person. Softer, I mean, more easily moved by things. When she was small, she would cry at commercials, the ones with dogs or elderly people getting cards in the mail. She'd press her face into my arm and I'd feel her eyelashes flutter against my sleeve. She was so open back then. The world came in and she let it. I don't know exactly when that changed. I suspect it was gradual, the way erosion is gradual. You don't see it happening, you just notice one day that the bank is different from how you remembered it. She met her husband at a conference in Toronto. He works in finance, something with investments I've never fully understood. His name is Preston. He's not unkind, not exactly. He's just very certain about things. Certain about where to eat and which neighborhoods matter and which schools their children will attend before the children exist yet. The first time I met him, I shook his hand and he looked at mine for just a half second too long. I was wearing my good blouse. I noticed anyway. They got married in 2019 at a vineyard outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was a beautiful wedding. I paid for the flowers, $2,200, and the rehearsal dinner, which came to just under $4,000. I didn't say anything about it. I wrote the checks because she was my daughter and I wanted her to have the day she dreamed of, and because somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed that generosity built bridges. I'm older now. I know it builds dependency, not bridges. There's a difference. After the wedding, it shifted. Not all at once, just in small, almost invisible ways. I'd call and get her voicemail 3 times before she'd ring back, usually while she was doing something else, her voice distracted and a little breathless. I'd invite myself for Sunday dinners, and sometimes she'd say yes, and sometimes she'd say they already had plans, and I'd put the pot roast in the freezer and eat toast at the kitchen table by myself. Preston's family came up from Oakville every other weekend. I knew this because she told me about their visits afterward, casually, in passing, the way you mentioned the weather. I told myself it was normal, that adult children pulled away, that I should give her space. I gave her so much space I nearly disappeared into it. When she told me she was pregnant, I cried at the kitchen table. Happy tears, real ones. I drove to their condo in Burlington the next Saturday with groceries, the kind she'd liked as a teenager. good soup ingredients, the right crackers, frozen pierogies from the Ukrainian place on Stone Road she used to beg me to stop at after swim practice. She let me in, thanked me, and then mentioned that her mother-in-law was coming Monday to help set up the nursery. I nodded and said that was lovely. I drove home on the 401 in the dark and kept the radio off the whole way. I still don't know why I kept quiet then. Habit maybe, or the fear that saying something true would make things worse. I had this idea that if I just kept being patient, kept showing up, kept offering what I could, eventually she'd remember who I was to her. People can forget though. That's the thing no one tells you about raising children. That one day they can simply forget how much of yourself you handed over without asking for it back. The baby shower was planned for a Saturday in April. I heard about it from Meredith in late February. She called me, actually called, not texted, which I noted, and told me there would be a small gathering at Preston's parents' house in Oakville. She said her friends and some family. She used the word intimate. I remember that specifically. I asked if she needed me to bring anything. She said she'd let me know. She didn't let me know. She called 3 weeks later, the call I described at the beginning, and told me it would be too much, too crowded, that she thought it would be easier if I didn't come, that she'd bring things by afterward and show me everything, that she appreciated how much I'd done. I said all right. That was a Wednesday. I spent Thursday cleaning the house. Not because it needed cleaning, just because I needed to be moving. On Saturday I got dressed anyway, not for the shower, just because sitting in my housecoat while my daughter celebrated 30 kilometers away felt like giving something up. I wasn't ready to give. I put on the gray blazer I wear to church. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, the good coffee. I sat at the table like I was someone whose time mattered. Then I drove to Oakville. I didn't plan to. I was just driving and I ended up there, or I let myself. I parked on the street 2 houses down from Preston's parents' place, a large brick colonial with a 3-car garage and flower boxes I'd have admired under different circumstances. There were cars in the driveway and balloons on the mailbox, pale green and yellow, my colors, the ones I'd picked for the quilt. I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't go in. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't there to make a scene or to show up where I wasn't wanted. I was there because I needed to see that it was real. Sometimes things aren't real until you see them with your own eyes. It was real. The laughter came out in waves every time the front door opened. Someone I didn't know was standing on the porch with a glass of sparkling water, taking a phone call, smiling. I started the car. I drove home. I hung the quilt on the back of the armchair in the spare room, the one I'd been calling the baby's room in my head for months. I sat in there for a while. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the chest at the foot of the bed. My friend Theodora called that evening. She'd been my closest friend since we were both on the hospital auxiliary together in 2003. She's a forthright woman. Doesn't soften things. Raised 4 kids alone after her husband left, and she has exactly 0 patience for what she calls performed helplessness. When I told her what happened, she went quiet for a beat, and then she said, "Well, how long have you been paying for the privilege of being ignored?" I didn't answer right away. She wasn't wrong. I ran through it in my head. Not for the first time. The wedding flowers and the rehearsal dinner. The $3,000 I'd transferred when they bought the condo and needed help with the land transfer tax. The new laptop for Preston when his work one broke, and he mentioned it casually at Christmas. The RRSP I'd partially cashed to help with their down payment in 2021, when the market was doing what it was doing. The monthly e-transfer I'd been sending since she went on maternity leave. Not a loan, she'd never called it a loan, because I knew Preston's salary was stretched with the mortgage and I didn't want her to stress during the pregnancy. I had never once been asked how I was managing, not once. Theodora said you have to stop being the emergency fund for people who don't consider you family enough to invite you to a baby shower. I said I know. She said, "Do you though?" I went to bed. I lay on my side of the bed, which is just my side now, which is just the bed. And I looked at the ceiling and I thought about who I'd become in relation to my daughter. I had become a resource. I had become a line item. I was the mother who paid and accommodated and said all right and drove home in the dark and put the pot roast in the freezer. I was the woman who built her daughter's life from the outside and was never let inside it. I thought about my own mother. She'd been a practical woman from Cape Breton who never wasted words or tears. She used to say that dignity was something you kept or gave away. No one could take it. You had to hand it over yourself. I'd been handing it over for years, one quiet yes at a time. The next morning, I didn't call Meredith. I made oatmeal, went for a walk along the Speed River, watched the geese doing whatever geese do in April, which is mostly argue and take up space with great confidence. I admired that. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I logged into my online banking. The monthly transfer to Meredith $400 set to go out the following Friday. I canceled it. My hands were completely steady. I looked at the other things. The car insurance I was still paying for her second vehicle, a holdover from when she'd first moved out, and money was tighter. $112 a month, she'd never mentioned taking it over. I canceled that too. The streaming subscription she used on my account. The small storage locker downtown I was renting, and she kept some of her things in, leftover furniture from before the condo. I sent an email to the facility giving 30 days notice. I didn't call her. I didn't explain. I just stopped. Then I called my financial advisor, a woman named Rosalind I'd been working with since my husband died. I told her I wanted to review my estate plan, that I was making some changes. Rosalind is one of those people who communicates everything through small, precise phrases. She said, I see, and I think we should talk, and I'd like to walk through this carefully with you. We made an appointment for the following Thursday. Meredith called that Tuesday. Her voice was different from how it usually was with me, less managed. She said there was an issue with the insurance company, that she'd gotten a letter about the car policy lapsing, that she wasn't sure if it was a mistake. I told her it wasn't a mistake. Silence. Then she said, Mom, what's going on? I said, nothing's going on. I'm simplifying. What does that mean? It means I've decided to stop paying for things that aren't mine, I said. She said that wasn't fair. She said she was pregnant and didn't need this right now. I said I was sorry she was stressed. I meant it. But I didn't take it back. She called again the next morning, voice tighter. Preston had apparently looked into things and realized the monthly transfer had stopped too. She asked if something had happened with my finances, if I was in trouble. There was something almost hopeful in the way she said it, I think. The idea that it was a practical problem would have been easier to solve than the truth. I told her my finances were fine. I told her I'd been doing some thinking. She said she wished I'd talked to her. I almost laughed, not cruelly, just at the particular blindness of that. I had been talking in my own way for years, showing up, driving home in the dark, putting things in the freezer, sitting in my car outside a house I wasn't invited into. My whole life with her in the last few years had been a conversation she wasn't listening to. The meeting with Rosalind was in a small office off Stone Road. She had everything printed out. My full picture, RRSP, TFSA, the pension, the house, the small investment account I'd inherited from my mother. She looked at me across the desk and said, "What are we doing, Elspeth?" I told her I wanted to revise my will, that I wanted my estate to go to my grandchild directly, held in trust until the child was 25, managed by an independent trustee. I didn't want it passing through Meredith and Preston. I didn't want it accessible to them. I wanted my grandchild to have what I'd built, but I wanted it protected. Rosalind said, "Have you thought this through?" I said, "I've thought about almost nothing else for 3 weeks." She nodded. She started making notes. We spent 2 hours going through everything. She referred me to her colleague who handled estate law, a measured man named Jeffrey who asked clear questions and did not waste my time. By the end of the week, the documents were being drafted. The will was being revised. The trust was being structured properly the way my mother would have wanted things done. Practical, clean, dignified. Preston called me once during that week. That surprised me more than Meredith's calls had. He didn't call me often, and when he did it was usually brief and functional. This time his voice was careful in the way it gets when he's working towards something. He said he and Meredith had been concerned about me, that they wanted to make sure I was doing all right, that they knew things had been hard since my retirement, and they wanted me to know they were there if I needed anything. The irony of that landed somewhere between my chest and my throat. I thanked him. I said I was well. I asked him to send my best to his parents. He said, "Elspeth, the car insurance and the transfer. Is this about the shower?" I said that was a very small part of a much larger picture. He didn't say anything after that. Meredith showed up on a Thursday evening, unannounced, in that way she has when she's decided something needs resolving on her schedule. She was 7 months pregnant and she looked tired, which made me want to hold her. That instinct doesn't go away. You can be furious with your children and still want to make them tea and put a blanket over them. That's just being a mother. I let her in. I made tea. She sat at the kitchen table in the chair she'd sat in her whole childhood, and she looked around the kitchen like she was calculating something. She said she didn't understand what was happening. I sat down across from her and I looked at her. I said, "I think you do." She said she was sorry about the shower, that it had been Preston's mother's event to organize and it had gotten complicated and she hadn't wanted to hurt me. She said it wasn't about me. I said most things that hurt people are never described as being about them. She said, "Mom, please." She said she needed me right now. The baby was coming in 8 weeks. Preston's firm was going through changes. Things were tight. She said it wasn't the time for this. I said when would be the time. She looked at me like she hadn't expected that question. Like she'd expected me to soften. I had always softened. I understood now that my softening had taught her that there was no bottom to it, that she could press, and I would always give way. I said, "Meredith, I love you. I have loved you since before you were born. I have worked and saved and given and bitten my tongue so many times I should have lost it years ago. And I have done all of it without asking for much. Just to be included, to be seen, to matter in your life as something more than a backup account." She started crying, softly at first, then harder. Sitting at the kitchen table in the same chair, crying the same way she had as a little girl when the world had come in too fast and she couldn't sort it. I didn't look away. I said I went to Oakville on Saturday. She stopped. I said, "I sat in my car and I didn't go in. I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what it cost me to sit there and to drive home and to say all right every single time." She pressed her hand against her stomach, the way pregnant women do when they don't know what to do with their hands. She said she didn't know what to say. I said, "You don't have to say anything tonight." She left an hour later. We weren't resolved. But something had shifted in the room, something in the angle of the air. She hugged me in the doorway, a real hug, not the obligatory kind. I let myself hold her for a moment. Then I stood on the porch and watched her drive away, the taillights disappearing around the corner at the end of the street. Theodora came over the next afternoon. She brought butter tarts from the bakery on Wyndham Street because she knows I don't have a sweet tooth for much, but I cannot resist a good butter tart, especially the ones with the slightly runny centers that make a mess if you're not careful. She says they're for me. I think they're her excuse to come over and check on me. I don't mind. She poured herself coffee without asking and sat down and said, "Well, tell me." I told her. She was quiet through most of it. Then she said, "You went and sat in the car?" I said, "Yes." She shook her head slowly, not with judgment, more like understanding. She said, "I know that feeling. I know exactly that feeling." Theodora's eldest hadn't spoken to her for 2 years after her divorce. It was a long story involving sides taken and words said, and the particular way families fracture under pressure. She knows what it is to be pushed to the margin of someone you raised. She came out the other side. She is one of the most complete people I know. She said, "Is the will changed?" I said, "It's being drafted." She nodded. She said, "Good." She said, "You're allowed to protect what you built, Elspeth. It doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. I said I don't feel cruel. She said you shouldn't. You should feel honest. I held my butter tart and looked out at the backyard. The rose hips were still there. Stubborn little things. I said I'm not doing it to punish them. I want to be sure about that. I'm doing it because my grandchild deserves something solid that actually comes from me. Not filtered through their parents' mortgage and their lifestyle choices. Just directly from me to the child. Theodora said that's the clearest thing you said in months. She was right. It was. The will was finalized on a Tuesday. Jeffrey's office was calm and smelled faintly of old carpet and good wood, the smell of a place where serious decisions get made quietly. I signed my name 3 times. Each time felt like writing the first honest sentence of a new chapter. I named my sister's husband as trustee. He's a retired school principal in Fredericton, sensible and fair, the kind of man who reads documents before signing them and still holds the door open for strangers. He agreed without hesitation when I called. He said it sounded right to him. I drove home along the back roads, the long way, past the farms and the old stone fences that have been there longer than any of us. The trees were just starting to bud. That particular green that only exists for about a week in April before it deepens into something more ordinary. I had the window down. For the first time in I don't know how long, I wasn't bracing for anything. A few weeks later, Meredith called. Her voice had changed again, not managed, not tight. Something quieter in it. She asked if she could come over on the weekend. I said yes. She asked if I'd show her how to make my chicken and leek soup, the one her father had liked, the one she'd never learned properly because she'd always been in too much of a hurry when she was younger. I said I'd have everything ready for Saturday. She came alone. Preston had the car, she said. She took the bus from Burlington, which takes 40 minutes with the connection at Aldershot, and she didn't complain about it once. She walked up the driveway in a big coat and rubber boots, and she looked like herself in a way she hadn't in a long time. Less composed, maybe. More present. We stood in the kitchen, and I showed her everything slowly. How to sweat the leeks without burning them. How much time, which is more than you think. How to know when the broth is right without measuring it, just by the color and the way it moves in the pot. She didn't say much. Neither did I. But she watched everything carefully, the way she used to when she was small and learning things that mattered. At one point, she put her head on my shoulder, briefly, just for a moment. Her belly was between us, and she was unwieldy and warm, and she was my daughter. We ate at the kitchen table. She stayed for 3 hours. We didn't talk about the money, about Preston, about the will. That will all have its time. There are conversations still to come that won't be easy. I know that. But for those 3 hours, we were just ourselves. 2 women in a kitchen in Guelph on a Saturday afternoon in May, making soup from scratch. She hugged me again at the door. She said the soup was good. She said she'd write down the steps when she got home so she wouldn't forget. I stood on the porch and watched her walk down to the bus stop at the corner. She turned once and waved. I waved back. There's a particular kind of peace that doesn't come from everything being fixed. It comes from knowing you are finally standing on the right side of yourself. From knowing that what you have left to give, you're choosing to give. Not out of fear of being forgotten. Not in exchange for permission to exist. Just because love, when it's clean, when it has edges and limits and honesty, is still the best thing you can build a life around. I'm 67 years old. I still have roses in the backyard. I still make soup from scratch. And for the first time in longer than I can say, I go to bed at night without checking my phone for a message that isn't coming. I sleep just fine. There's a particular kind of reckoning that doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces. A canceled call. A party you weren't invited to. A drive home on the 401 in the dark with the radio off. For me, it came sitting in my car on a street in Oakville, watching balloons on a mailbox in the colors I had chosen for a quilt I'd sewn with my own hands. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, honest way that life teaches you if you're willing to pay attention. Every time I said all right when I meant something else, I taught Meredith that my feelings had no floor. Every check I wrote without being asked how I was doing confirmed that I was a resource, not a person. I didn't do those things out of weakness. I did them out of love, which is a different thing. But the consequences landed the same way. What we allow, we invite more of. That's not a punishment from the universe. That's just how people learn to treat us. What I had to find again was something I'd let go of slowly over years without noticing. A kind of moral clarity about my own worth. Not pride, not stubbornness, just the basic belief that what I'd built over a lifetime of early mornings and difficult years belonged to me, and that I had the right to decide what it was for. When I sat across from Rosalind and told her I wanted the trust to go directly to my grandchild, I wasn't being cold. I was being honest for the first time in a very long time. Honesty about what love should look like when it has limits and edges and self-respect built into it. The hardest part wasn't the legal documents or the canceled transfers. It was the moment Meredith sat at my kitchen table and cried the same way she had as a little girl, and I didn't immediately give in. That took something, a kind of steadiness I'd had to rebuild almost from scratch. Because the pull to comfort your child, to smooth things over, to be the soft place, it never leaves you. I had to hold two things at once. I love you, and I will not undo what I've decided. Holding both of those without dropping either one, that's the work. What I've come to believe is that real strength in a relationship isn't about who gives the most. It's about whether both people are thinking clearly. Meredith wasn't thinking clearly for a long time. She'd been moving through a version of our relationship that I had accidentally built for her, one where I was always available and always yielding. When I stopped, it forced her to look at what had actually been happening. That's not cruelty. That's the most useful thing I ever did for her. Theodora was right that it was about damn time, but she was also the one who reminded me that knowing when to stop is its own form of wisdom. It's not giving up, it's recognizing that you cannot keep pouring from an empty place and call it love. I went to bed that Tuesday night after signing the documents and I slept without checking my phone. That's not a small thing. For years I had fallen asleep hoping for something that never came. Some word that said, "You matter here." That night I didn't need it from anyone else. I already knew. The soup on that Saturday in May was good. Meredith wrote down the steps when she got home. She texted me to say so. I read it in the morning with my coffee and I sat with it for a while. Not every ending needs to be dramatic. Sometimes the repair looks like two women standing in a kitchen, one of them finally learning a recipe she should have asked for years ago, and the other one finally ready to teach it.